Robert Redford's passing on September 16th saddened the world. In his final weeks, Redford confided in his wife, Sibylle Szaggars, who had been his companion for the last 3 decades of his life. He didn't speak of his will or his vast fortune, but instead shared his most profound wishes for his family, his eldest child who passed away too soon, and his great aspirations for a beautiful world like a dream. So, what were the legendary star's wishes, and why were they so heartbreaking? Throughout a career spanning over half a century, Robert Redford etched his name into Hollywood history with iconic roles: the witty con man in The Sting, the dashing outlaw in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and the lovelorn man in Out of Africa. Beyond being an actor, he was an Oscar-winning director and the founder of the Sundance Film Festival, a launchpad for young talent. Behind the fame, Redford lived a much quieter life than his contemporaries. He chose to connect with nature, retreating to his log cabin in the Utah mountains instead of the glittering lights of Los Angeles. As he aged, Redford withdrew from the public eye. In his final weeks, he no longer thought of film sets or red carpets, but only of being by his wife, Sibylle Szaggars' side. After he passed, Sibylle Szaggars shared the things Redford had confessed during his last days, and they surprised the public when revealed. 1. Hoping his children would live normal lives. Redford always hoped his children and grandchildren would live ordinary lives untainted by fame and unburdened by their father's shadow. He once told his children, "Live the most simple life you can." In his mind, Redford had a yearning for his family to go camping together, to gather around a fireplace listening to the crackling fire in the Utah woods. This is why he built a safe zone for his children and grandchildren to grow up in a place with nature and no paparazzi. Yet, the more he talked about his children and grandchildren, the sadder Redford became. Because there was one thing he would always carry with him: the memory of his eldest son who passed away too soon. 2. The grief for his first son and the wish to have seen him grow up. The greatest pain of Robert Redford's life was in his private home. His firstborn son died just a few months after birth from sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. He once confided in his wife that he often wondered, if he were alive, what would he be like? Whose gait, smile, and eyes would he have? Every time he watched his other children grow up, Redford felt a pang of sadness, wishing he could have witnessed his first child mature just once. Because of this, he never stopped telling his children, "Treasure every moment you are alive, because not everyone is lucky enough to grow up." Perhaps that's why Redford never stopped yearning for life, because amidst the losses, he still held another quiet desire. 3. A peaceful departure without sensational headlines. "I don't need to be remembered for any scandals," Redford quietly told his wife and children. "I only hope that if anyone mentions me later, it will be because of the films, the forests, and the values I've tried to cultivate my whole life." In a previous conversation, Redford had affirmed he only wanted to be remembered for the work, for his professional and spiritual legacy, not for fame or fleeting awards. To him, all that glory was just the outer shell of an artist. Redford's final wish was to pass away peacefully and not be splashed across tabloid headlines. And indeed, when the legend died, the public knew almost nothing beyond the fact that his family had declined all interviews. However, behind this simple wish, Redford still held another deep-seated concern. 4. Wanting to live a long time and continue my current work. Redford never saw age as a reason to stop. Even in his 80s, he consistently appeared on camera-directed films and spent time in nature and with his family. To him, the concept of retirement was almost meaningless. He once shared, "Retirement means stopping or giving something up." But why stop when there's still life ahead and you're still strong enough to live it to the fullest? Redford's simple yet powerful wish was to live a long time, to continue doing what he loved, telling stories through cinema and spending time with loved ones. For him, work was life, and as long as he could, he wanted to continue on that path. And when he spoke of his artistic path, Redford often mentioned a special place, the home he had worked so hard to build. 5. Protecting Sundance as a forever home for independent cinema. Redford often referred to Sundance as his spiritual child. He didn't see it as his personal property, but as a common home. Sundance isn't mine. It belongs to the young artists. His greatest fear was that one day Sundance would be swept into a commercial vortex where box office numbers would overshadow the spirit of creativity. Redford hoped the next generation would continue to protect Sundance's soul, a fertile ground for bold films, stories that challenge the status quo, and young artists who dare to dream and try. To him, Sundance must always be a place where cinema is made from the heart, not just for profit. It was this dedication to Sundance that made Redford so troubled by the other legacies he would leave behind. 6. Not allowing his legacy to become an auction item. According to his wife, Redford never saw his legacy as money. He viewed each painting diary entry or collection as the very breath of a person's life. He hoped they would remain as living mementos in his Utah log cabin rather than being turned into luxury goods on an auction floor. For Redford, their true value lay in the stories, the memories, and the love he instilled in them, so his children and grandchildren could continue to feel and cherish them, instead of treating them as assets to be spent. When he spoke of his legacy, his eyes would light up. Because beyond all personal mementos, Redford also held a great aspiration. 7. The dream of a beautiful nature and wildlife preservation. Robert Redford purchased over 1,800 acres of land around Sundance to protect the forests and mountains. He once said, "If I don't do it, who will?" Even in his old age, he wanted to preserve nature and his beloved forests. Redford and his family committed to conserving over 860 acres within the Redford Family Nature and Wildlife Preserve located on the Sundance property in North Fork Canyon. In 2020, he also placed 316.5 acres at the Elk Meadows site under a conservation easement to protect wetlands, meadows, and wildlife habitats. At Sundance Mountain Resort, he established a principle of limited development: develop less, preserve more. This was the guiding principle to keep the land in its natural state, despite commercial development pressures. But he didn't stop there. When speaking of nature, Redford often mentioned something that seemed unrelated: people. 8. Empowering Indigenous artists. According to his wife, Robert Redford was very close to the Indigenous communities. He didn't just collect their art, but also supported young directors and artists. For Redford, Indigenous art was not an inanimate decoration. From the early days, he collected Navajo rugs, Anasazi pottery, and Kachina dolls. He wanted these works not to be behind lifeless glass, but to be felt and understood. Through the Sundance Institute, Redford created many opportunities, from making films to telling their own stories to sharing their identity and history. When he produced The Dark Wind or supported Dark Winds, these projects helped Indigenous people reclaim their voices on the big stage. Redford hoped that when audiences saw his collection, they would not only see beauty, but also feel the perseverance, pride, and pain of a culture. For him, empowering Indigenous artists was not an act of charity, but a responsibility, a cultural justice, and an integral part of his legacy. But Redford didn't just stop at giving a voice back to Indigenous communities. Deep down, he also harbored a much greater aspiration, one that transcended borders and ethnicities. 9. A world of peace and no war. Robert Redford once told his wife and children that he hoped the world would have no more wars. He wanted his children to grow up in a just society where indigenous people were respected as part of history's heritage. He believed that art was a healing balm, and it was not tied to war or violence. He repeatedly spoke out about the need for social justice, especially for marginalized and indigenous communities. He felt society was increasingly divided and needed to be healed with compassion, and by listening to voices that were often ignored. He hoped his legacy would not just be the glimmer of the silver screen, but a reminder that each of us has a responsibility to choose the path of fairness and peace. For Redford, the desire for peace didn't just stop at ending wars. In his final days, he often talked about something even grander. 10. Humanity needs to move away from oil dependence toward clean energy. In the mid-1970s, when Hollywood was still caught up in neon lights and extravagant parties, Robert Redford's gaze turned to something few paid attention to: the sun and wind. He started talking about clean energy when the concept was still unfamiliar, even ridiculed as a fanciful dream. In a later article in the Huffington Post, Redford admitted he was ahead of the curve with solar, as policy wasn't ready then, and the public saw it as fantasy. But Redford didn't give up. He used cinema, his most powerful language, to sow the seeds of change. In 1975, he collaborated with legendary designer Saul Bass to produce the Solar Film, a short film introducing solar energy. Redford continued to use his voice and wealth to invest in renewable energy. He participated in environmental campaigns working with organizations like the NRDC to prevent coal-fired power plants from being built right in the middle of Utah. But even while fighting for clean energy and the environment, Redford didn't forget another battleground he was tied to his whole life: Hollywood. 11. Hollywood can be more forgiving to artists, allowing them to be weak, make mistakes, and live a full life. A lifetime spent under the bright lights, Robert Redford witnessed too many repeating tragedies. Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, Heath Ledger, stars who burned brightly and faded too young. It pained him to see Hollywood not only exploit them to the fullest when they were alive, but also turn their legacies into commodities after their deaths. According to his wife, Redford had often confessed his weariness with the glitz that surrounded Hollywood. The all-night parties, the glamorous suits, the calculating handshakes on the red carpet. He never truly felt he belonged to that world. Redford's final wish was surprisingly simple. He hoped Hollywood could be less ruthless and more forgiving to artists. That they had the right to be weak, to make mistakes, to live a full life instead of being consumed by the limelight. But perhaps what enabled Redford to maintain his clarity amidst a superficial Hollywood didn't just come from his own will. Behind every contribution, every wish, there was always a quiet companion. Sibylle Szaggars, the woman behind Robert Redford's social contributions. Throughout his life, Robert Redford was remembered by the public as Hollywood's golden gentleman, a timeless icon of world cinema. But behind the silver screen's glamour, few knew that in his final years, one woman became his support, his soulmate, and a fresh wind that breathed new life into his spirit: Sibylle Szaggars. Sibylle was not a movie star, nor was she a woman who sought media attention. She entered Redford's life as a visual artist, a German-born painter with a powerful yet poetic style who used color and form to tell stories of nature, culture, and balance in the world. It was this artistic connection, this shared love for art and the environment, that bound two souls who seemed to come from different worlds. Sibylle was born and raised in Hamburg, Germany, before moving to the US. Unlike many visual artists who lean toward the modern, she chose a path close to nature, exploring raw beauty and traditional values. In Sibylle's paintings and installations, one often sees warm, muted tones and patches of color that capture the rhythm of mountains, oceans, moonlight, or the breath of the desert. What's special is that Sibylle didn't see art as just decoration, but as a way to speak out. She organized numerous multimedia exhibitions combining music, light, and paintings to raise awareness about climate change and the fragility of the earth in human hands. Her artistic career therefore naturally harmonized with the lifelong ideals Robert Redford pursued, protecting the environment and fighting for green justice. Robert Redford met Sibylle when he was in his 50s, an age when many might think the heart has settled down. But a profound connection quickly blossomed between them. It was not the loud public dates of glamorous Hollywood, but quiet afternoons walking under the Utah forests, conversations by a fireplace, or trips to wild lands to seek creative inspiration. Sibylle brought a balance to Redford that he had always sought, a quiet life where he was no longer Robert Redford the movie star, but just Bob the simple man who loved nature. She never tried to be the center of attention or to leverage her husband's fame to advance her career. Instead, she quietly built a peaceful home for him, exactly as he had always wished to live a quiet life. They married in 2009 in a small, simple ceremony in Germany. No Hollywood, no flashbulbs, but a private space with only family and a few close friends. For Redford, it was the final confirmation of a love that didn't need to be proven to the world, only to the heart. For over a decade of living together, Sibylle was not just the wife behind Redford, but an active partner in his social and artistic projects. She joined him in the activities of the Redford Center, a nonprofit environmental organization, and also initiated many international environmental art projects herself. On one occasion at an exhibition, Sibylle shared that she believed art could touch hearts where political speeches cannot. This philosophy was identical to how Redford used cinema to create films that reflected society, from All the President's Men to Quiz Show. They met not just in love, but in the belief that art could change the world. On September 16th, Hollywood fell silent. The entire film world seemed to freeze at the news that Robert Redford, the man once called the Golden Gentleman of the silver screen, had taken his last breath at his familiar log cabin in Utah. He was 89 years old. The news was not loud. There were no sensational Hollywood headlines typically associated with legends. It came like a cool autumn breeze, surprising yet also anticipated, as Redford had lived his whole life preparing for this peaceful withdrawal. Redford was born in 1936 in Santa Monica, California, a place that the world would later call the cradle of the Hollywood dream. But he was never a child destined for fame. In his youthful diaries 1959-1962, Redford confessed his insecurity, self-doubt, and constant comparison to others. Yet it was these insecurities that honed a deep-seated actor, leading the world to be astonished by the rugged Butch Cassidy in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid 1969, or the melancholic Jay Gatsby in The Great Gatsby 1974. He was more than just a cinematic face. Redford was also a producer, an Oscar-winning director for Ordinary People 1980, and above all, the founder of the Sundance Film Festival, the breeding ground for thousands of independent directors worldwide. Yet his life was not without its shadows. His first son passed away from sudden infant death syndrome. His first marriage ended. And for decades he had to watch friends and colleagues from Marilyn Monroe and James Dean to Heath Ledger pass away in loneliness, exploited by Hollywood to the very end. In contrast to his public image as a gentleman on the red carpet in his private life, Redford chose to live quietly. He built a small log cabin in Utah, surrounded by the forests and mountains he always yearned to preserve. He bought over 1,800 acres of land around Sundance, not to build luxurious resorts, but to save the forests and mountains. In many interviews, he admitted to disliking the superficiality of Hollywood. The all-night parties, the calculating handshakes, the expensive suits that felt alien to him. Redford chose a quiet life. To him, family was never a show to flaunt. This is why he always kept his children away from the limelight. He wanted them to live the most normal life possible. In Redford's eyes, a cozy dinner by the fireplace listening to the crackling fire was more valuable than any applause in a movie theater. These wishes, Sibylle revealed, were like the final whispers he dedicated to his family. People often say Robert Redford left behind a net worth of over $200 million USD, thousands of acres of land in Utah, multi-million-dollar properties, and a rare art collection. But those numbers are just the surface. The deeper part is a legacy that cannot be measured in money. The films he acted in and directed, from The Sting to All the President's Men, which have become a treasure trove of world cinema. The Sundance Film Festival, which he founded, has supported generations of directors, from Quentin Tarantino and Steven Soderbergh to unknown filmmakers. And the numerous environmental campaigns he persistently pursued for over half a century, from advocating for solar energy in the 1970s to fighting climate change. When Redford closed his eyes at his Utah log cabin, not only did a family lose a husband and father, but the world lost a spiritual anchor. The news spread, and fans left messages. He wasn't just an actor. He was a part of my youth. Thousands of letters, tens of thousands of tributes poured in. People laid flowers in front of Graceland for Elvis, and now they stood at the foot of the Utah mountains lighting candles for Redford. But if he could say one thing before he left, Redford would surely smile and repeat his simple wish. Don't remember me for rumors. Remember me for what I did, the films, the forests, and the values I tried to cultivate. Robert Redford passed away the way he had lived, quietly, without pretense, leaving behind not tabloid scandals, but a timeless legacy. He was a legend not just because he conquered the silver screen, but because he dared to live authentically, holding firm to his beliefs in art, nature, and humanity. And perhaps that is true immortality. People still prefer to believe in a sparkling fairy tale where glory and applause are a cure that erases all of life's scratches. But the truth is always more brutal. Behind the red velvet curtain and the dazzling smiles on the red carpet, another world exists, shattered, exhausted, and quietly bleeding. A legend is never forged in peace. It is cast from sleepless nights, from the hollow look in the mirror, after the makeup has been washed away from the forced smile that hides a heart full of cracks. The more brilliant the light, the colder and lonelier the shadow behind it. There are secrets that seem to have been buried forever in the drawer of the past, covered in dust by time and praise. But sometimes just a forgotten scrap of paper appears, a word slips out in a moment of weakness, and everything can collapse. And when the perfect mask falls, what sends shivers down one's spine is not just the naked truth, but the haunting question: was the belief we so long cherished just a glamorous stage concealing a bottomless chasm no one dared to face?